My son looked me in the eye across the kitchen table and said, "Mum, honestly, this house is too much for you now. You should think about what comes next." Behind him, his wife Renata stood, with her arms folded and her chin slightly raised, the way she always did when a decision had already been made before the conversation began. My granddaughter Zoe was sitting on the floor in the hallway, pretending to read. I knew she was listening. I stood very still for a moment. The kitchen smelled like the apple cake I had just pulled from the oven, the same recipe my late husband Gerald had asked for every Sunday for 31 years. Neither of them knew that 3 weeks later I would transfer the deed to this house to someone they had never met. Let me start from the beginning, because this story doesn't make sense without it. My husband Gerald and I bought this house in Burlington, Ontario in 1988. We were young enough to think we had all the time in the world, and careful enough with money to know we didn't. Gerald was an electrician. I worked part-time at the school board office. We saved for 6 years before we could put a down payment on anything. And this house, a red brick semi-detached on a quiet crescent near the lake, felt like something we had genuinely earned. We planted a silver maple in the front yard the spring Zach was born. That tree is taller than the roofline now. Gerald died of a stroke 4 years ago. He was 67 and in good health, or so we thought. I came home from the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon and found him on the kitchen floor. The paramedics were kind. The doctors were kind. Everyone was kind in that careful, practiced way people become kind when there's nothing useful left to say. That first year without him, I learned what loneliness actually feels like. Not sadness, not grief exactly, but a specific kind of quiet that settles into a house where only one person is living. I stopped making coffee in the large pot. I stopped leaving the radio on. I folded my half of the bedding neatly against the wall every morning because leaving it open felt unbearable. My son Zachary called often in those early months. He drove up from Hamilton on weekends sometimes, brought groceries, sat with me in the kitchen talking about nothing. I was grateful in a way that felt almost physical, and I told myself that, whatever came next, at least I still had him. I should have paid closer attention to what came next. The call happened on a Saturday evening in March. Zachary's voice was tight in the way it gets when he is trying to sound calm and failing. Renata had lost her job at the marketing agency. They had 2 car payments, credit card debt they hadn't mentioned to me before, and a landlord in Hamilton who had just informed them the building was being sold and converted. They needed to be out in 60 days. "We just need somewhere to land," Zachary said. "Just until we sort things out." I didn't hesitate. That is the part I return to most often now, wondering what would have been different if I had. But I loved my son, and the house had 4 bedrooms, and Gerald always said family was the whole point of having anything worth keeping. They moved in on a Friday in April. Zachary and Renata took the master bedroom because Renata said the guest room wasn't large enough for their wardrobe, and the stairs made sense for me to avoid. In the mornings, my knees being what they are. I moved into the small room at the back of the house, with the window that looks over the garden. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was fine. For the first few weeks, it almost was. Zoe helped me in the garden on weekends. She was 9 then, and full of questions about which plants came back every year, and which ones you had to replant. Zachary fixed the leaking tap in the upstairs bathroom and cleaned the gutters without being asked. Renata cooked dinner on Tuesdays. I thought, maybe foolishly, that we were going to be all right. Then the small things started. Renata rearranged the living room furniture without mentioning it. When I said I'd preferred the couch under the window for the light, she smiled pleasantly and said the room flowed better this way. Gerald's reading chair, the one with the worn armrests he had refused to reupholster for 20 years, appeared one morning in the basement. "It was taking up space," Renata said. When I asked Zachary about it, he said she was just trying to help. I brought the chair back upstairs myself and said nothing more about it. But things like that kept happening. Gerald's bookshelves were replaced with Renata's decor. The curtains I had hung the year we moved in, thick green ones, Gerald used to joke made the house look like a cottage, came down one afternoon while I was at my Tuesday volunteering at the food bank. When I came home, the windows were bare. They were dated, Renata explained. She had ordered replacements online. She showed me a picture on her phone. I nodded and went upstairs. That night, I sat at the back window for a long time looking at the maple tree. Gerald planted it 35 years ago. I was not going to let this become the kind of grief that drowns a person, but I was beginning to feel something I couldn't quite name. Not anger, something colder. About 3 months after they moved in, I came downstairs early one morning and found Zachary going through the filing cabinet in the study. Not the household filing cabinet where I kept utility bills, the locked one where Gerald and I had kept important documents. It was open. I was looking for the property tax paperwork, Zachary said without looking up. I stood in the doorway for a moment. That cabinet has a key, I said. He looked up then. The key was on the hook. I nodded and walked to the kitchen to put the kettle on, but something had shifted in my chest and wouldn't shift back. Looking back now, I think that was the morning I started paying attention in a different way. Renata's changes to the house accelerated through the summer. She started referring to rooms by what she planned to do with them. The study would make a good home office. The garden shed should come down. It was an eyesore. The upstairs bathroom needed to be gutted eventually. I noticed that in these conversations I was never consulted, only informed. And more, I noticed the word we, where the word I should have been. We should really update the kitchen at some point, she said over dinner one evening. I put down my fork. This is my kitchen, Renata. She smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Of course. I only meant eventually, when you're ready. When you're ready. As if it were already decided and only the timing was mine. Zachary said nothing. The night I heard them talking, I had come downstairs for water around midnight. The kitchen light was on. I stopped in the hallway when I heard Renata's voice, low and deliberate. We need to be thinking about this properly, she said. The market here is insane. This property is worth well over $1 million now. Zachary said something I couldn't hear clearly. I know, Renata said, but she's not going to be in it forever. And if we're the ones maintaining it, paying into it. She pays everything, Zachary said. His voice had something strained in it. A pause. Then Renata. For now. I stood in the dark hallway with my hand on the wall and felt something settle inside me. Not the kind of settling that brings peace. The kind that comes just before you make a decision. I went back upstairs. I did not sleep. The confrontation I had been dreading arrived on a Sunday afternoon in September. Renata sat down at the kitchen table across from me, with the particular air of someone who has rehearsed what they plan to say. Dorothy, we've been thinking, she began, and I felt the hair on my arms rise because that was not my name. My name is Frances. Renata had always called me by my first name until that moment, and then in the middle of this particular sentence, she called me by the wrong one entirely, and she didn't even notice. Frances, I said quietly. She blinked. Sorry? My name. Right, yes, Frances. Sorry. She moved on without pause. We've been thinking about the long-term arrangement here, and we feel it would make more sense for us to take over the monthly expenses going forward. Utilities, insurance, maintenance. That way, you can conserve your retirement savings. And in exchange, we'd want to formalize things a little. Nothing complicated. Just something that clarifies everyone's position. I looked at her carefully. What kind of something? She set a single sheet of paper on the table and slid it toward me. It was handwritten. At the top it said Property Contribution Agreement. My chest tightened immediately. I picked it up and read it slowly. The language was amateur, but the intention was clear. In exchange for covering household expenses, they would be recognized as contributing to the property and entitled to a share of any future proceeds from its sale or transfer. I set the paper down. Where did you find this template? I asked. Renata looked surprised that I had identified it as a template. I looked some things up online. You want me to sign something that gives you an ownership stake in my house? It's not like that, Renata. I kept my voice even. This is my house. My name is on the deed. Gerald and I paid it off in 2011. There is no mortgage. There is nothing to contribute to. Her expression shifted from pleasant to something harder. We contribute every day. Our time, our energy. We've made significant improvements. You've redecorated without asking me, I said. That's not the same thing. She stood up and folded her arms in that familiar way. I think you're being quite difficult about this. Zachary was not in the room. He had made himself scarce before this conversation began, which told me something important about how much he already knew. That evening, I called my oldest friend, a woman named Paulette Renaud, who had known me since we were both new teachers in our 20s. Paulette had been watching this situation from the outside for months. When I told her about the paper Renata had produced, there was a long silence on the line. "Frances," she said finally, "you need to call someone who knows property law." I did not sleep well that night either. The following Tuesday, I sat across from a lawyer named Mr. Osei Bonsu in a small office on Brant Street. He had been recommended by the legal referral service at the community center where I volunteered. He listened to everything without interrupting, including the agreement Renata had produced, which I had brought in a sealed envelope. He read it carefully. Then he set it down. "This document has no legal standing," he said. "You haven't signed it, and even if you had, a handwritten note produced under informal pressure wouldn't hold up. But I want to ask you something directly. Have they asked you to add either of their names to the deed or to your will?" "Not yet," I said. "Not yet," he repeated. He looked at me steadily. "Mrs. Whitmore. Whitmore is my married name. You can call me Frances. Frances, I want you to understand something clearly. Your name is on this deed. This property is entirely yours. But if you have begun to feel that your right to make decisions about your own home is being questioned, that is not a normal living arrangement. That is something else." I stared at the potted plant on his windowsill for a moment. "What do I do?" "You protect yourself," he said. "First, secure your important documents somewhere they cannot be accessed without your knowledge. Second, speak to your bank and confirm that no one has made inquiries about this property using your name without your authorization. Third," he paused, "you decide whether you want to stay." I drove home along the lake. The water was the color of pewter in the October light. I thought about Gerald, about the maple tree, about the way Renata had set that paper on the table with such calm certainty, as though my agreement were simply a formality. I thought about what it means to disappear from your own life slowly enough that you almost don't notice. When I got home, Renata was measuring the wall in the study with a tape measure. She didn't hear me come in. I stood in the hallway and watched her make a note in her phone. "What are you measuring?" I asked. She startled slightly. "Just thinking about built-ins eventually, that word again." "In my study," I said. She smiled. "In the studies, yes." I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the small back bedroom bed for a long time. Then I called Paulette again. "I think I know what I need to do," I said. "Good," Paulette said. "Tell me." The decision to sell didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived the way most honest things do, slowly, through accumulating clarity. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I finally understood that I had been quietly, steadily removed from my own home, without a single piece of paper being signed. The furniture, the curtains, the filing cabinet, the study, the agreement. Each thing on its own was small. Together they formed something unmistakable. I called a real estate agent I had known through my years at the school board. A woman named Sandra Okafor, who had sold houses in Burlington for over 20 years. I told her I was thinking of listing privately to start. She came to the house on a Thursday morning while Zachary and Renata were both at work and Zoe was at school. She walked through quietly, taking notes. In the kitchen, she paused. "How long have you been here?" 36 years, I said. She nodded. "It shows. In a good way. There's a maple tree in the front yard we planted the year my son was born." She looked at me carefully. "Frances, this property would move very fast." "I know," I said. "That's rather the point." Within 2 weeks, she had brought 2 couples through privately. The second couple, a young pair named Audrey and Peter Lefebvre, arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. He was as a carpenter. She taught at the French immersion school 3 streets over. When Audrey walked into the kitchen, she put her hand against the old tiles above the stove, the ones with the blue pattern I had chosen in 1994, and said, "These are beautiful. Please tell me you're keeping them." I felt something open in my chest that had been closed for a long time. Peter spent 15 minutes in the garden, asking me about the perennials. He wanted to know which ones came back on their own and which ones needed dividing. He stood under the maple tree and looked up through the branches. "This is a serious tree," he said. "My husband planted it," I said. He nodded, still looking up. "We'll take care of it." I accepted their offer the following Friday. The closing date was set for 6 weeks out. Mr. Osi Bonsu helped me with the paperwork. Sandra handled everything else. I told no one in the house. The morning of closing, I dressed carefully. Gerald's favorite color on me was pale blue, so I wore the blouse I had bought for our last anniversary dinner together. I put on my good earrings. I drove downtown alone. The signing took less than an hour. Audrey and Peter were across the table, looking nervous and hopeful in the way young people do when something large is happening to them. When the final transfer was complete, Audrey looked at me with slightly wet eyes and said, "Thank you for trusting us with it." I drove back slowly along the lake road. My phone rang as I turned onto the crescent. It was Zachary. "Mum, there's a woman here who says she's from a real estate office. What's going on?" I pulled the car over and sat for a moment with the engine running. "I sold the house," I said. The silence on the other end was so complete, I could hear the wind through the maple tree behind him. "You what?" "I sold the house. The transfer was completed this morning." Then Renata's voice in the background, sharp and rising. Then Zachary again, and his voice had changed completely. "Mum, what do you mean you sold it? You can't just when. How long have you?" "You have 60 days, I said. The buyers were generous." 60 days. Renata's voice was fully audible now. 60 days, are you serious, Zachary? I said. "I need you to listen to me." A silence. "You asked me to take in your family because you needed help. I did that without hesitation. I gave you my bedroom. I paid every bill in this house. I watched your wife try to sign away my ownership of my own property with a handwritten note from the internet. And then I stood in my own hallway and heard her say that I was not going to be in this house forever. As though I were something temporary she was waiting out." Nothing from the other end, but I could hear him breathing. "I am not a waiting room," I said. His voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Mum, 60 days, I said gently. "You'll figure it out, you always do." I hung up. I sat in the car for a while on the side of the road with my hands in my lap. The sky over the lake was very clear. A pair of Canada geese were crossing the road about 40 meters ahead, completely unhurried, and I sat there and watched them until they had finished. The calls came through the rest of that day. Zachary, then Renata, then Zachary again. Renata's messages escalated from demands for explanation to accusations of cruelty to a final message that said simply, "We have a mortgage pre-approval based on this property. This isn't just about you." I sat with that message for a long time. Then I called Mr. Osi Bonsu and read it to him. He was quiet for a moment. "What kind of pre-approval?" "I don't know yet, Francis. If they used this property's value as informal collateral for a financial product without your knowledge or consent, that is a serious matter. Not for you legally, but for them." I closed my eyes. "How serious?" "Serious enough that I'd like you to forward me that message." That evening, Zoe knocked on my bedroom door. I had been sitting in the back room with Gerald's old reading chair, the one I had refused to leave in the basement. She was still in her school clothes. Her eyes were red. "Grandma," she said, "are we really leaving?" I patted the arm of the chair next to me, and she came and sat on the edge of the bed. "Yes, sweetheart." She was quiet for a moment. "Where are you going to go?" "I've found a place," I said. "A condo near Aldershot. It has a balcony. I'm going to grow tomatoes on it." She almost smiled. "Grandpa grew tomatoes." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why." She twisted the end of her sleeve. "Are you angry at my dad?" I thought about that honestly. "I'm sad," I said. "Anger is easier. But mostly I'm sad." She looked at me then, this 9-year-old child trying very hard to be brave about something that was not her fault and never had been. "Mom said you were being selfish." "I know she did," I said. "I don't think you were," Zoe said. I reached over and took her hand and held it for a minute without saying anything. Children say true things because they haven't yet learned to protect the people they love from the truth. I was not going to cry in front of her. "Grandma?" she said. "Yes." "The house at Aldershot. Is there room for me to visit?" "There is always room for you," I said. That will never change. The condo was on the fourth floor of a building 3 blocks from the GO station, with a view of the escarpment to the south and the beginning of the Niagara fruit belt on clear days. It was half the size of the house. It was entirely mine. The first morning I woke up there, I made coffee in a small pot, opened the balcony door, and sat outside in the early light. No tension in the walls, no footsteps above me, no measuring tape, no pieces of paper slid across tables. I held my mug with both hands and listened to the city waking up below me. And for the first time in longer than I could name, I felt the particular relief of existing somewhere safe. There was a letter I had not yet opened. Gerald had left it with our lawyer years before he died, sealed and addressed in his handwriting to me. Our lawyer, a woman named Mrs. Chakravarti, who had handled our affairs for over 2 decades, had held it all this time. She gave it to me the week before closing, saying Gerald had asked her to pass it along if she ever felt I truly needed it. She didn't explain how she had known. She simply said, "I think this is the right time." I opened it on the balcony on my 3rd morning in the condo, with coffee and the sound of the escarpment birds. "Francis," he had written, "if you're reading this, you're probably in the middle of something difficult. You always handled hard things with more grace than you gave yourself credit for. I want to say something clearly, because I know you, and I know that you will have been bending over backwards for everyone around you before you bent even once for yourself. This house is yours. Everything in it is yours, not because of paperwork, but because you poured your whole life into it. And if the day ever comes when staying in it costs you more than leaving, then leave without guilt. A house is just the container. The home was always you. I don't want you to spend what's left of your life making yourself smaller so other people feel comfortable. You were never small, Francis. Don't start now." I put the letter down on my knee and looked out at the escarpment for a long time. Zachary came to see me 2 weeks after the closing. He came alone, without Renata, which told me something. He sat at my small kitchen table looking at his hands. "She's furious," he said. "I imagine she is." He looked up. There was something in his face I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the managed, careful expression he had worn all year, but something genuinely broken open. "Mum, I knew about the pre-approval. I was quiet. She told me it was just to see what we qualified for, based on future." He stopped. "She said eventually the house would come to us anyway, so it was fine to use it as a reference point with the broker." I set my cup down. "How much?" He rubbed his face. 60,000. I felt the weight of that number settle onto the table between us. "Zachary," I said carefully, "you borrowed money against a future you had decided was already yours." He didn't argue. He just nodded, slowly, which was more honest than anything he had said in months. "I let her make decisions I should have questioned," he said. "About the house, about you, about what we were entitled to. You watched me get smaller," I said, "and you didn't say anything." "I know." We sat there for a while. Outside, the light was moving over the escarpment in that particular late autumn way that makes everything look very still. "I'm not going to say it doesn't matter," I said finally. "Because it does. It's going to take me a long time to rebuild trust with you." He nodded without flinching, which was something. "But you're still my son," I said. "That doesn't have a sell-by date." He looked at me for a moment with wet eyes, and then looked back down at his hands, the way he used to do at 10 years old when he was trying not to cry and didn't want me to see. I slid an envelope across the table. He looked at it. "What's this?" "Respite contributions," I said. "In Zoe's name. The paperwork is already filed. Regardless of anything else that happens between you and Renata, she has this." He opened the envelope and stared at the papers for a long time without speaking. Then, very quietly, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," I said. "That's rather the point." He came around the table then. This grown man I had watched learn to walk, and hugged me in a way he hadn't in years, with his whole chest the way children do before they learn to be careful about needing people. I held on. I let myself. Paulette came for dinner the following Saturday, and we opened a bottle of Ontario for Riesling. She had brought from a winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. One Gerald and I had visited every summer for 15 years, and we sat on the balcony until after 10, watching the lights of the escarpment and talking about everything and nothing. "You look like yourself again," Paulette said. I feel like myself again, I said. I'd forgotten what that was. She refilled my glass. Gerald would have laughed at all of this, you know. He would have had something very dry to say about it. I agreed. And then he would have made tea and waited for me to figure things out on my own. He always trusted me to do that. Paulette looked out at the lights. He wasn't wrong. Spring came to the condo balcony in March, with 4 tomato seedlings from the garden center on Plains Road, 2 cherry and 2 heirloom, exactly as Gerald used to grow. I repotted them in terracotta containers and set them along the railing in the late morning sun. Zoe came over on a Saturday to help. She was wearing her gardening gloves, the small yellow ones I had bought her the previous spring, already slightly too small now, because children grow faster than you ever expect. She pressed soil carefully around the base of each seedling the way I had shown her, the way Gerald had shown me, the way I supposed someone would eventually show her own children one day. "Grandma," she said, not looking up from the pot. "Are you happy here?" I looked out at the escarpment. The maple trees along the ridge were just beginning to bud. That pale, tentative green of early spring that always reminded me of starting things. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." She looked up then, checking my face in the direct way children do when they're not sure if adults are telling the truth. Whatever she found there, she seemed satisfied. She went back to her seedling. I went back to mine. And we stayed there together in the morning light for a long time, tending to what we were growing, letting it be enough.